It's strange how relationships can take such unexpected turns. I had been married for several years, and though we were close, our marriage had always been unconventional. My husband and I had explored the idea of polyamory, allowing each other the freedom to connect with others while still maintaining our bond. It was a mutual understanding, a way to keep things interesting in a relationship that had begun to feel stagnant. But as the years went on, our marriage became more of a formality than anything else. We were drifting apart, and it was clear that something needed to change. That's when I decided to try something different, to seek out new connections and experiences. I downloaded OkCupid, hoping to meet someone who might bring a spark back into my life. It wasn't long before I came across Jez's profile. He was 42 years old while I was 28, but there was something about him that intrigued me. We exchanged messages, and our conversations flowed effortlessly. Jez was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a few weeks of chatting online, we decided to meet in person at a restaurant near my house. The evening went better than I could have imagined. Jez was even more captivating in person, and by the time dinner was over, I felt like I had known him for years. I invited him back to my place, where he met my husband. To my surprise, they got along well, and it wasn't long before Jez and I began dating. At first, the relationship was everything I had been looking for. Jez was sweet and caring, always there to listen and make me feel valued. He showered me with affection, gifts, and attention, making me feel like the most important person in the world. It was intoxicating, the kind of love that sweeps you off your feet and makes you forget everything else. But as time went on, cracks began to form. Jez became increasingly possessive, struggling with the idea of sharing me with anyone else, even my husband. He tried to end things, saying he couldn't handle the polyamorous nature of our relationship, but soon came back, begging for another chance. I gave in, hoping that things would work out. Around the same time, my marriage finally crumbled. By August, it was over, and my husband had moved out by October. I was left alone in a place I couldn't afford on my own, so when Jez offered to move in, I reluctantly agreed. It seemed like the practical choice, but deep down I knew it was too soon. The moment Jez moved in, everything changed. The man who had once made me feel so special now turned into a controlling, jealous, and lazy stranger. He started dictating who I could see and how I should spend my time, making it impossible to maintain friendships or even enjoy simple pleasures without his interference. Things took a darker turn at my work Christmas party. Jez had initially refused to attend, but changed his mind at the last minute. Instead of enjoying the evening, he sulked and criticized everything and everyone, making me feel embarrassed and on edge. The breaking point came when he snapped at my manager, who had been nothing but kind to him. I realized then that the man I had fallen for no longer existed, if he ever did. From that point on, our relationship spiraled into a nightmare. Jez's behavior became more erratic and cruel. He dismissed my thoughts and feelings, belittled my appearance, and accused me of catfishing him. He drained me financially and emotionally, leaving me feeling trapped and isolated. One of the worst moments came when a close friend of mine died. Jez showed no empathy, instead questioning why I even cared. It was a stark reminder of how far he had drifted from the caring person he once pretended to be. The final straw came during an argument that escalated into something terrifying. Jez's rage boiled over, and he punched a door inches from my head, his eyes filled with a darkness I had never seen before. I knew then that I had to get out. With the help of my landlord, I was able to change the locks and finally rid myself of Jez's presence. He tried to manipulate me into taking him back, flooding my phone with apologies and promises. But I ignored them all. The illusion was shattered, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my life. Looking back, I still wonder what Jez's true intentions were. He had been so convincing, so perfect at first, but it was all a facade. In one of our last conversations, I asked him what had happened to the man I fell in love with. His answer was chilling. "That guy doesn't exist. I told you what I had to tell you to get you away from that awful husband of yours. You're just foolish and fell for it." It took me years to rebuild my life after Jez, to regain my trust in myself and others. But I've learned that not everyone who seems perfect really is, and that some people will do anything to get what they want, no matter the cost. About 2 years ago, I met a man named Alex on a dating site. He was charming, confident, and incredibly handsome. We quickly felt a strong attraction to each other that seemed almost magnetic. It wasn't long before our casual chats turned into regular meetups. We often went out for wine and food, and those evenings, filled with laughter and conversation, usually ended at his apartment, where our connection would deepen. At that time, I was 20 years old and living in Europe. My life was full of youthful energy and curiosity, and Alex seemed to fit perfectly into that world. He had a way of making everything feel exciting and new. Our routine at his apartment became almost ritualistic. I would change into something comfortable, usually a lace negligee, while he prepared the wine. I'd relax on his sofa, smoking a cigarette as I lost myself in a book, feeling his eyes on me the entire time. There was an intensity in the way he watched me that made my heart race, a blend of desire and something I couldn't quite put my finger on. For almost a year, we had a passionate relationship. It was thrilling, but as time passed, I began to notice small, unsettling details about Alex. There was a darkness that lingered beneath his charming exterior, something that made me uneasy, though I couldn't fully understand why. It started with little things. His moods would shift unpredictably, or he would make offhand comments that left me feeling cold. But it wasn't until one particular night that I truly began to question who Alex really was. That night, we were together as usual, when he suddenly picked up an expensive camera I hadn't seen before. He said it belonged to a man who owed him money. Without warning, he began taking pictures of me, even during our most private moments. I felt a wave of discomfort wash over me. The act felt intrusive, wrong. I asked him to delete the pictures, but he just smiled and told me they were only for him. His tone left no room for argument, and though I tried to convince myself it was harmless, deep down, I knew I couldn't fully trust him. Despite these growing doubts, I chose to ignore the warning signs. I told myself it was just part of the thrill, part of what made Alex so different from anyone I'd ever known. I was drawn to the danger, the unpredictability of it all. When I moved to another city to continue my studies, we saw each other less often. My life was getting busier as I dove deeper into law school, but the memory of those nights with Alex lingered in the back of my mind. 4 years later, I found myself back in my old city for a visit, and I ended up running into Alex again, this time in the company of his friend Max. The years hadn't changed Alex much. He was still as captivating as ever. But there was something about Max that intrigued me too. There was a lightheartedness about him that was refreshing, a contrast to the intense energy that Alex always carried. We spent the evening together, and though it was fun, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A few months later, Max contacted me out of the blue. He had something important to tell me about Alex. When he finally said it, I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. Alex hadn't been traveling the past few years as he'd claimed. Instead, he had been in prison for at least 4 years. My mind raced as I tried to process this information. I had to know more, so I decided to search for Alex's name in the public database. What I found made my blood run cold. The first result detailed a severe rape case involving Alex. The crime was brutal. He had attacked a woman with a knife, causing her immense fear and pain. The more I read, the sicker I felt. The timeline of the crime matched when we had been together. How could I have been with someone capable of such violence? A mix of emotions flooded through me: anger, disbelief, guilt. I questioned everything about our relationship. Had I missed the signs? Could I have somehow prevented what happened? It was hard to accept that the man I once felt so close to was capable of such horrors. The need for answers gnawed at me, but then I remembered something that made my blood run cold. I had seen Alex just a few months ago. He wasn't behind bars. He was free, walking around as if nothing had happened. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. If he could do something so terrible and still walk free, what else was he capable of? The darkness of his actions wasn't just a shadow over my thoughts. It was a looming threat, one that could strike at any moment. I wasn't sure if I was more afraid of him or of the fact that I had ever let him into my life. I was nearly 13 years old, and I was being raised by my grandparents. We lived in a little tourist town in Florida. They had had problems with their 2 daughters as adults, my mother being the older of the 2. And they wanted to do everything that they could to make sure that I didn't turn out the same way, a do-over, if you will. So needless to say, they were very strict. My aunt was having a good period. She had her stuff together. We were all very close. My aunt understood what it was like to be raised under a glass dome, metaphorically speaking. They raised her too, after all. So being as she was my only aunt, she made sure that the time we spent together was always super cool. I would stay over Saturday nights. We would go out and hang out at the pier, and she would let me hang out with my middle school boyfriend, who would find ways to get to wherever I was. My grandparents had no idea of any of these activities, of course. I was just spending some quality time with my aunt and giving them a break. It was nice that I had a younger female figure since my mom wasn't around. One night when we were out having fun, my aunt meets this guy and they really hit it off. He was very nice and introduced himself to me. He went by JR and at first was a kind and charming talker. They exchanged numbers after hanging out a while, and then we went home and went to bed. They ended up going out a bit more, and my aunt had really liked JR. He took her to his home and introduced her to his father and showed her around his land. He lived out in the woods in the middle on nowhere. I have lived in this town for 30 years, and I still to this day couldn't tell you where it is. I was only there once. He was teaching my aunt how to shoot a gun. I remember her shoulder rocking back with the impact of the shot, and it surprising her. He had these weird flamenco dancing clothes in his closet. It was all seemingly harmless. I mean, everyone has their quirks. About 10 days, maybe 2 weeks later, we were again at the pier out by the payphones talking about what to do that night and what to get for dinner. JR and my aunt were in their late 20s, early 30s, and as much as she loved me, I imagine there were times that I got in the way. Well, anyway, we were at the pier and he is talking about how he has these painkillers. He offered me one. I declined, of course, and told him I had a high tolerance to pain anyway and didn't need that stuff. He then, with a huge smile, asked me if he can see for himself, assuring me he won't really hurt me. He's just trying to have fun. This bastard twists my arm behind my back until I hear a pop. I start to cry and he laughs and says, "Aw, sweetheart, I was only playing. You said you had a high tolerance. I guess I was stronger than I thought I was being. I'm sorry. No need to ruin the good time we are all having." I go in the private pier office, which my granddad managed, crying. My aunt comes in and tells me she agrees it's messed up and that she's talked to him about it. She goes back outside and he asks her what she is up to that night. She tells him that she isn't sure if I am staying over because with what had just happened. I was whining about going home. I was pissed that she hadn't decked him right there for hurting me. Well, he tells her that she should meet him under the Sunset Bridge at 2 a.m. on the other side of town. He says that the stars are beautiful and you can listen and hear the fish. He tells her he would love to see it with her, and they can dance under the moon. We were all from a fishing family and live in a fishing town, so fish activities under the bridge at late times wasn't necessarily something that threw up a red flag. If it's dark and late, there won't be people there hogging all of the fish. She tells him maybe, and then we left. I decide to spend the night after all, later sneaking in only if she will pick up my boyfriend Charlie. Playing up on guilt points, she calls him when she gets home before we made our arrangement about Charlie and says that she can come but she will have me with her. About an hour after she called JR the first time, I ask her about Charlie and she agrees. She sits down with me and hugs me and touches my face lovingly, apologizing for what had happened with my arm. My aunt was an amazing woman, and I love her very much. She then calls him again and tells him not to worry. She is picking up Charlie, so I will have my own entertainment, and they can have their time. He goes into a rage and starts sputtering and cussing about how it's too complicated now, and he just wanted an intimate meeting with her, not a family reunion. He went on about how he didn't want to have to babysit a 13-year-old kid and her 14-year-old boyfriend. He hangs up after calling her crazy. She told me what happened. We go about our night with pizza rolls and PlayStation and things are fine. He calls her a few more times and drives by the house for a couple of weeks. But my aunt was having none of it. After a while, he left our lives just as swiftly as he had came. The whole affair lasted only a month, if even that. 3 weeks maybe, and all in all, it wasn't the craziest experience she has had with a man. JR was soon forgotten and we went about our business. Fast forward 2 years later, I am almost out of middle school. My aunt had moved to a city about 40 miles away. I still lived with my grandparents. They were still strict, but as they had gotten older, so had I. I knew a few ways around the rules. One day my friend Frank and I missed the bus home from school and called our good high school friend Darla to pick us up and take us home after riding a bit. She had this big, beautiful red truck, and I would ride around in the cab of it, loving the freedom and the wind. We were smoking cigarettes, laughing and listening to the radio. The time I would have spent on the bus before my stop was just enough time to hit up the taco drive-thru. We cruised down the road a bit before heading back home. Frank lived just down the road. We had a lot of fun that day. She dropped me off first. My grandparents came outside. They were heavily confused at the sight of an unknown vehicle, and even more so when they saw that I had gotten out of it. After letting her be the one to explain because she was older, cooler, and more responsible, my parents thanked her for being kind enough to take me home. They said how lucky I was that she had just happened to be there to help me get home. That was the last time we ever saw my friend. She didn't show up for work for 5 days. I can't speak for everyone, but I assumed she just had ran away. Darla's parents were going through a nasty divorce. The dad had a hot new girlfriend, and the mother was very bitter about it, rightfully so, I guess. It was embarrassing for all of the kids. Her truck wasn't left behind. I figured she got tired of her parents acting like infants and took off. I missed her, but she was in a whole other league of freedom and coolness. 16 is a whole different life than 14, especially when you are in different schools. I wished her well, maybe even a little envious that she got out of this town and I was still here. I hadn't heard anything for 2 weeks about her when, at about 9 at night, my grandparents got a phone call to turn on the news. Her body was found out in the woods. She had been strangled to death and just left out there. I don't even know for how long. I was devastated. I was so joyful that I had that last experience with her, but so saddened and horrified. She was so young, barely older than myself. She was about to be 17 in just a short time. It was a very sad time for our town. The good and bad news is they caught the guy that had done it. He confessed after some very incriminating evidence, and during his questioning also confessed to killing his girlfriend, who had been missing for about 8 years, and also his father, staging his death to look like a suicide by hanging. When they showed his mugshot on the screen and said his name, I swear I almost passed out. There, clear as day on the screen staring back at me, was a picture of JR. I had no idea they even knew each other. I can't even imagine what would have happened if we had gone under the bridge that night. Investigation Discovery Channel did a piece on it a couple of years back. I was shocked to see it on the TV. The memories came rushing back and I decided to write them all down. I literally have a newfound appreciation of life now that I'm old enough to understand just how close I could have come to being killed. My aunt lived on to make awesome new memories with me. I have a beautiful life with my husband and 3 boys that most likely wouldn't have happened if things had gone differently that night. There are moments when I feel like I need to shout my story to the world, but then I think back, see how content people seem in their lives, and I wonder if it's worth dredging up. It feels so distant now, but there was a time when it wasn't. My sister, always the more daring one, was 19 and just dipping her toes into online dating. She had a specific type: Older guys who seemed reliable, steady. To me, they were just boring, emotionally shut off. I could never understand what she saw in them, but then again, I was only 15, naive and inexperienced in every way possible. No first kiss, no first date, not even an idea of what I wanted in a relationship, let alone what I might feel for someone. But my sister, she was different. She moved through the world like she knew exactly what she wanted, and after a few dates with someone new, she came to me, asking for my opinion. She wanted me to friend him on Facebook, to give my take. I had this odd reputation for being able to read people well, like some kind of profiler, and she trusted me. He was 30, older, with a 6-year-old daughter. I remember thinking how close I was to the daughter's age. It struck me hard how out of place everything seemed. He had a house, a decent job in IT, and a Facebook profile that was littered with pictures of his ex, the type of woman who looked like she could have been a cheerleader. It made my sister insecure, though she never outright admitted it. Back then, I wanted to be a profiler, someone who could read people's minds, uncover their secrets. Funny thing is, he was the best profiler I'd ever encountered. In just a day, he picked up on my biggest insecurities, guessing things about me that I hadn't even said out loud. The way he talked to me, like my thoughts mattered, it was intoxicating. Our conversations were deep, philosophical, touching on things like the origins of life. It made me feel like we were on the same intellectual level, like we understood each other in some profound way. But there were these moments that reminded me how immature he could be. There were the dumb jokes and things that seemed so juvenile. I still remember how he asked for my phone number like it was some kind of grand favor, and I gave it to him thinking it was harmless. Then he sent me a picture of a pepperoni pizza after hinting that he might send something far less innocent. It was this constant game, pushing boundaries but never quite crossing them, always keeping me on edge, unsure. Once he told me his desires would send him straight to hell, but they were just thoughts for now. That message I remember vividly. I was sitting on the kitchen counter swinging my legs, waiting for my phone to finish charging. It was around 8 p.m., just after dinner, on a regular February night. I wore white jeans and those fuzzy blue slippers that kept slipping off my feet. The moment I read those words, I felt this rush of panic. I ran upstairs trying to pray the disgust away, but it never left. It wasn't just that one thing. There were other moments that gnawed at me. He'd casually talk about what he imagined I'd be like in bed. Completely wrong, by the way, and it left me feeling uneasy, though I couldn't explain why. He once asked for a picture of me with my stomach showing. It seemed innocent enough at the time, and I wondered if I was overreacting, but there was this gnawing discomfort I couldn't shake. It took me years to realize that my instincts were right, that my discomfort wasn't born from inexperience but from something far more disturbing. I can thank him for the self-doubt, though. My sister eventually broke up with him. She told me he'd started creeping her out, and I just nodded, agreeing without getting into the details. We never told our parents about him, and the relationship fizzled out quietly, almost like it never happened. Looking back, I don't think she ever gave him much thought afterward, and as time passed, neither did I. It felt like a strange chapter in both our lives, one that we turned the page on without ever fully addressing. It's funny, though. I've grown a lot since then, become someone completely different from that naive 15-year-old. If he saw me now, he wouldn't recognize me. And honestly, I'm glad. There's a part of me that hopes he doesn't remember any of it, any of us.